Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the Conservation Commission and Inland Wetlands and Watercourse Agency meeting for Tuesday, June 18th. We have a quorum today. We don't have any alternates, do we? Are you an alternate?
Yes.
You're an alternate. All right.
Yep.
So you may sit for one of the vacancies.
Right,
So,
we'll say Jason, yes.
Jason.
Yep.
All right. There are no minutes. Oh, conservation business. All right, I guess I'm up. Tonight we're going to do a presentation on invasive plants, which is a growing and serious issue in our town. So this is part of our educational mission to talk about these conservation issues. And tonight we're going to be talking about invasive plants. So this is a picture. I don't know, could we have the lights down a little bit lower? So we can see how red those plants are.
You can just do the front ones.
That's it. Okay. All right, this is, no? That's good. That's good. That's good. All right, so these are these lovely burning bush that you see all over town, usually in people's yards. But this is a stretch of, I don't know which route it is, it's in Granby, and they have escaped from people's yards and they are now in the woods. And yes, they look beautiful, but they are not native. So tonight we're going to talk about what invasive plants are, why they're here, what's the problem with them, and how we can remove them and the problems they cause. So I love this quote by D.H. Lawrence. It says, "The eyes do not see what the mind does not." So if you don't know about these plants, they look lovely out in the woods. They look healthy, green, and beautiful, but as my husband said, I've now ruined all our walks because I will be pointing out all the plants that are here that should not be here. And we all want lovely gardens. This is absolutely spectacular, but when we look closer at our gardens, you can see that there's something different about our gardens. There's something interesting about our gardens, and you can see the common trend of all those plants that are in that garden is they're not from around here. And that's because way back when, there were explorers that went around the world, and as they explored new areas, they saw new plants and brought them back. Some of them had great economic value, and some of them were just beautiful, and they brought them back for those reasons. And you can see there are lovely tales of daring do about people that went and found these plants and brought them back to show which areas their country, their home country, had colonized. It was a great prestige. And you can see the names of some of these plant explorers in the names of the plants. So they were named after the Sargent crabapple was named after Charles Sargent. And you can see Fortunae and a lot of different plants that Robert Fortune brought back. These are plants that we have in our garden. So about a third of the plants in the Northeast were introduced from some other country or region of the United States, around the world. And most of them are well behaved. We don't see peonies escaping into the woods. But several do not behave themselves. This is the kudzu, the plant that ate the South. It's pretty dreadful. That's a house under there. And sometimes they're absolutely beautiful. This is a plant called loosestrife, purple loosestrife. It used to be when you went up to the Mohawk River Valley in August, it was just a sea of purple, and butterflies loved it. So is this a serious problem? Well, yes, it is. Nationwide, we're losing millions of acres each year to alien plants. Half the species on the federal species endangered list are due to the invasive species, mostly plants, sometimes insects, and other things, but it's expensive and time-consuming to remove them. I'm president of the Simsbury Land Trust. One of our biggest jobs now is to remove these plants from our preserves because they are not helpful. So what makes a plant invasive? Well, there are 5 key traits. Mostly they produce an abundant crop of seeds and fruit, and their seeds are easily spread, often by the wind, but mostly by the birds who eat these berries. They travel through their digestive tract, and then they're dropped in a nice little fertilized package somewhere far away from your garden. They're easy as all get out to grow. They grow because they've left all of their predators, their herbivores, their diseases, anything that would eat them and keep them under control in their own country, the old country, they love it here. They can grow and multiply, and they outcompete a lot of our other plants. So I know when I moved to Simsbury in 1986, I looked to see what I should plant in my yard to feed the birds. And a lot of these plants that we'll be talking about were ones that were suggested by Audubon because they made so many berries. But we weren't thinking that totally out. So how did they get here? Well, this is where we as gardeners have a great responsibility. We love those new plants. You know, the garden magazines that are sent out, we love those new exciting plants. So we put them in our yards, and they're not necessarily tested to see whether they're going to escape or not. 30% were actually introduced by conservation agencies for a specific person, either to feed the birds or to control erosion. And then some were accidentally brought in. And where were they coming from? They were coming from places that had climates very similar to ours. So if you look at that map, we are not being invaded by plants from South Africa. The plants that are problematic here are coming from the same color area around the world. So either Europe or China or Asia, Japan, China, and those areas. And why is that? It's because they have the same climate. And interestingly enough, our plants were taken over there, and they are problematic over there. So plants that behave beautifully over here are not behaving well over in these other areas. And this is all called the Columbian Exchange. Ever since Christopher Columbus, we've been exchanging plants, and it's been causing havoc. So what we're going to do tonight is going to meet some of these invaders. Now, one of them you've already met. That's the purple loosestrife. It's a beautiful plant. It was originally put into gardens as a lovely plant, a nice tall plant in the back of the border, added beautiful color. Interestingly, this plant makes millions of seeds. And if they get into a wetland, this is what can happen. It can dominate the entire wetland. It outgrows all the other plants. And while this is very beneficial for things like butterflies, it is not at all beneficial to the caterpillars. And if you remember your second grade science classes, in order to have a butterfly, you need a caterpillar. Well, caterpillars tend to be very picky eaters. They don't eat loosestrife, and the butterflies are very promiscuous feeders. They'll drink nectar from almost anything if they can get their little straw-like tongues down into that flower. So the butterflies love that plant, but the caterpillars can't eat it. So if you don't have caterpillars, you're not going to have butterflies. And this is true for a lot of the plants that we're going to look at. So here's another one. This one is the one you're probably most aware of in your yards. This is the one that will, turns these lovely orange berries in the fall, and people go out and gather them and make a wonderful wreath out of them. And then they throw the wreath after the Thanksgiving holidays are over, and they're switching to the later holiday season. They will throw that in the backyard, and lo and behold, you will have these vines in your backyard. So this is the one, you see those wonderful berries. The birds love them. You can see it climbing up the tree on the bottom left, and that's what it looks like in the fall, but in the upper left, you can see that's the vine that's covering that tree. The interesting thing about these vines, unlike some of our native vines, these ones will strangle the tree. They're like, you can think of them as like a giant boa constrictor. They will cut into the cambium, the living layer of the tree, and essentially strangle and kill that tree. So these are very easy to tell. If you see anything that's sort of snaking up by itself and wrapping around something, that's the bittersweet. And if you drive around Simsbury, you can see an awful lot of these trees being strangled and killed by these plants. One of my least favorites, burning bush. I had beautiful big burning bush in my yard. When it reseeded, as they do around my yard, I took them and put them in a nice little hedge. And then I learned that no, these are not good plants. They turn a beautiful color. They turn bright red in the fall, but they're easy to identify. Other times in the year, they have these what they call corky wings. You can see in the bottom right-hand corner. There you can see the birds up there eating the berries, and it's got nice opposite leaves. It's a very easy plant to identify, and it's one of the bread and butter plants of the nursery industry. Connecticut has a very strong nursery industry. And this, because it's so easy to grow, it's hard to kill this plant. Anybody can grow it. This has been a very, a favorite for the nursery industry because it's easy to grow, but it's also a favorite because it turns red for a couple of weeks in the fall. And that's all people are looking for. It also has a very thick root system. It's hard to anything else to get established underneath it. And when it gets into our woods, this is what happens. It becomes the dominant plant of the understory of the woodlands. So, I often try to think, we need some hook to tell people, to make them aware that this plant is a problem in our landscape. And I think we need some slogans, like get the red out, Visine already has this. For those of you who are of a certain age, this better dead than red, it's a popular one. Or friends don't let friends plant burning bush. I mean, we all have neighbors with burning bush, and it's very hard to go up to your neighbor and say, that's an invasive plant. We aren't there yet with the education as to why we need to remove these plants. Another one that was planted was encouraged. I think these plants were sent home with Simsbury school children to plant, because this plant, autumn olive, produces an amazing amount of berries. It's easy to recognize. It's got silver leaves underneath and the green oblong leaves on top. It's why Connecticut smells so good in May. You can go on any of our hiking trails, and there are these little tiny creamy yellow flowers, and they smell wonderful. And there's the underside of the leaf. But all of those flowers will be visited by bees, so you'd think, oh, it's good for the pollinators. Well, maybe, but you can see that it has been pollinated, because it does make lots and lots and lots of berries. And this is why it was promoted as a good plant for conservation agencies. But because it makes lots and lots of berries, these berries are spread again in the birds' droppings, and they grow everywhere. And they have some interesting effects on the soil. They outcompete the native species because they are so dense, they grow so well, they create dense shade, and they interfere with the natural plant succession and nutrient cycling. Another one that was heavily promoted by the conservation agencies was multiflora rose. This is why Connecticut smells so good in June. As a matter of fact, I was over at Elizabeth Park in early June, and went and smelled, tried to smell all the various roses that were in Elizabeth Park. None of them had a scent, because that scent's been bred out of them as they were hybridized. The only thing that was the least bit fragrant was the multiflora rose that was nearby, the rose garden. You probably have this, once it's pollinated, it does make those lovely little rose hips that are just the right size for the birds to eat. And here you can see it makes these arching canes. And because of these arching canes, it was planted alongside our highways with the idea that it would be a living guardrail. You could drive your car in there and you would be caught by these branches of the multiflora rose. It's easy to identify. It has downward facing thorns. They're absolutely wicked, but it's that base of the leaf over there where the multi-petal stem joins the multi-leaf stem joins the main stem. You can see that fuzzy, that hairy, they call it a hairy stipule. It's the only rose that has that. So if you see that, and you see the multiple white flowers, but you don't always see them all year because the flowers drop off very quickly and you get the berries. But if you see that little hairy thing at the base where the stem joins, and you've got multiflora rose, and you should remove it. Here's why it will take over. You can see it's climbing up over a shed, and you can see what it might take to remove this. You need eye protection, you need good gloves. You can get in and do it, but it's once it gets really big, it gets harder and harder. The time to remove it's when it's small. Speaking of removing, this one was brought in by gardeners. This is Japanese knotweed. It was brought in because aren't those little flowers pretty? But it also looks a little bit like bamboo. It's got these red speckled leaves. The stems are hollow. Not leaves. The stems are red speckled. Oh, thanks. And then it is a plant that will not die. This is Japanese knotweed growing up through concrete. It will grow up through almost everything. The roots are incredible. It stores a lot of its energies in its roots. They can be very deep, very thick, and if you dig it up and leave the slightest little bit of a root behind, it will come back. The seeds can float down the river, and they often establish themselves along the stream bed. And this is useless habitat. There are no insects that use this plant. There's no animals that really use this. The bees will pollinate it, but that's about it. Now in England, you cannot sell your house if you have Japanese knotweed on it. The bank will not give you a loan. So they take this so seriously, and it will grow up, that site has to be decontaminated. Another plant from Europe is the Norway maple. We have a lot of Norway maples around town. They were planted because they were resistant to a lot of things. They leaf out early in the spring. They're a handsome tree, but they don't belong here. The interesting is they will flower before any of our maples. Our native plants know that New England weather can be unpredictable. These come from a different climate. They leaf out sooner. They get a head start. You can identify them by their keys, their seed things. You can also identify it if you rip off a leaf. You can see it's got a latex sap to it. So not at all like our sugar maples. We wouldn't want this on our pancakes. It'd be kind of chewy. And because they leaf out early in the spring, they interrupt the life cycle of our spring wildflowers that take advantage of that brief period of time when it's warm enough for the plants to grow and still enough light because our native trees haven't leafed out yet. These ones block the wildflowers, so they're responsible for decline some of our wildflowers. They create very dense shade, and they just go to town because nobody's eating these plants. Another one that's used in our yards is Japanese barberry. Again, it was planted because of the little red berries. Great wildflower plant, it was thought. And a lot of people plant them for the maroon. We actually have in some of our islands in town some of these maroon Japanese barberry. And everyone says, well, I never see the maroon ones. They don't escape from my yard because though I have maroon ones. Well, if those seeds get planted from the maroon ones, and the seeds get eaten by the birds and get into the woods, they will not go back maroon. That's a cultivar. They will revert back to type. They will revert back to green. And you can see this understory is completely dominated by Japanese barberry. Now, Japanese barberry is a wicked plant. It's got lots of little, very thin, very sharp spines on it, and the lovely little berries. And it can get to be about 4 or 5 feet when it's fully grown. But this is a wonderful habitat for the white-footed mouse, the deer mouse. And in areas where and you can see wherever you have the deer mice, you have ticks. So this is a health issue. And what the Connecticut Agriculture Experiment Station has found that in areas where the barberry is infesting the understory of the forest, there are so many ticks. And in areas where you don't have those barberries, there are hardly any ticks. And with anyone who's ever had Lyme disease, we don't want those ticks. So we don't want those barberry. But they're tricky to remove. We had a forest mulcher go through a couple of our properties at the Simsbury Land Trust to remove them because it was just too hard for everyone to get in there without being damaged by these plants.
How can you get rid of them?
You have to mow them down and you have to spray them. If you're a homeowner, it's different. You can just keep cutting and cutting and cutting or dig them up. But if you've got a whole woodland of them, it's very difficult. Another one, there are a whole bunch of non-native honeysuckles. They're very lovely little shrubs, but they can get out of control. One of the more common ones is the Lonicera macchiae. It makes these red berries. And the interesting thing about these plants is that the birds, a lot of birds will get the color for the pigments for their feathers from what they eat. So in the cases where they've had, and there's an orange one too, an orangeberry honeysuckle, and where the birds only eat the orange one, it's just like when we eat too much too many carrots, too much pumpkin, too much squash, we will turn on a lovely orange glow. Our skin will start to change from that. And the birds, when there are too many orange berries, instead of having that yellow tail, which the cedar waxwing should have, they found that the tail turns orange. And that doesn't seem like a big thing unless you're a female cedar waxwing looking for a mate, and you look at him, and with the orange tail, you say he looks strange, and you're just not going to choose him for that mating season. So it affects all sorts of different things, and also these are high in sugars, but not necessarily they don't have the right nutrients that a lot of our native plants have. Another one's common buckthorn. Again, it makes berries. This is not from around here. It was introduced, about 200 years ago, but it spreads. It does have thorns. But the interesting thing is those berries, again, they're high in carbohydrates, but the wrong nutrients for our plants. And these ones can actually cause diarrhea and death in our birds if they eat them. So this is very problematic. They're tuned in with the life cycle of another bird in another country. They're not tuned in for ours. This is the easiest one to pull out at any rate. This is garlic mustard. You probably have it in your yard. It's a biennial. So the first year it looks like a little basil rosette. The second year it starts making insignificant flowers, and those insignificant flowers, and they start to spread because all of those flowers will make lots and lots of seeds. They have seed pods. This is a very devious plant because it is in the mustard family. It makes a chemical, jasmonic acid, that goes into the soil that kills off the mycorrhiza, which is the fungus that grows into the tree roots and helps the trees communicate with each other and share nutrients and nutrients from the fungus in exchange for sugar. So it goes in to kill off that fungus that's in the root that's helping support the tree. This is something that's really just sort of, really in the last 10 years, really become known about this thing called the wood wide web, where the trees are communicating through the fungi. And if the garlic mustard kills off the wood wide web, then the trees are weakened. The trees are weakened, they're more susceptible to disease, and they don't grow as well. Then the garlic mustard gets more sunlight, and all is well for the garlic mustard. This is one that's recent to Simsbury in the last 10 years, mile a minute vine. It has distinctive triangle leaves, little green berries that blue berries that the birds love. But like its name, it grows really quickly. So 6 inches in a day is really rather fast for a plant. And here you can see when a woodland starts to be taken over by this mile a minute vine. And here's a map that shows how it's spread. So that only goes up to 2021, so it's beyond that now. Another one that you see more and more along the side of the road is mugwort. This is in the Artemisia family. On the left are the flowers, and they make seeds, and they're spread by wind. But they also spread by rhizomes, these little tiny bits of root. So when you pull them out, if you leave any of the root behind, it will start to grow. And you will see more and more of this. It's got a silvery underleaf. It looks like a chrysanthemum leaf. I see more and more of it along the roadsides in Simsbury. And then here's one called the Tree of Heaven. Doesn't that sound great? But this one was again planted as an ornamental. But when it says it's allelopathic, it means it gives off chemicals that will kill off the other plants around it. So it has an unfair advantage. It looks very similar in its leaf to our native sumac, which are not, unless you go into the marsh, you're not going to find poison sumac. The native sumacs are a great habitat tree, but if you break off a leaf of one of these, they do not smell good. They have a nasty, nasty smell. And unfortunately, these plants can produce 300,000 seeds annually. I mean, this is a problem. And even if they're only 2 years old, they can produce seeds, and then their aggressive root structures, they can spread like mad through their things. Where you have this plant, however, you will have the spotted lanternfly. And I don't know if you've been hearing about the spotted lanternfly. The Tree of Heaven is their favorite host plant, but this insect, which is from Asia, will feed on a lot of different plants, especially things like apple trees and cherry trees and things that we rather enjoy. So this is a very devastating insect. So if you see anything that looks like that, let the town know, or let the Agricultural Experiment Station know, or the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group. They're working on that too. And then this is a fascinating one. This again was planted, and it's called the giant hogweed. It has been found, it's got these nasty little spiky things that there. Do not pull it out without a lot of protection, because it has very irritating and poisonous sap that can actually even cause skin cancer, blindness, if you don't pull it out the right way. So a lot of these things, some of them are easy to pull out, some of them are easy to contain, some we can work on relatively easily. It's easy to chop down a burning bush, keep mowing it, but other things are trickier and need some thought. As I said, there is a group called the Connecticut Invasive Plant Working Group with the interesting little acronym SIPWIG, but they have put out books about invasive plants in your backyard. The Simsbury Land Trust will be publishing a book this summer and we're hoping to mail it out to every single property owner in town that identifies 10 of these plants that are most problematic in Simsbury. But there's some wonderful information online, like the Penn State Extension. They have wonderful videos. But if you don't know about these plants, if you're not even thinking about it, you're not going to go to the website. And that's why we thought having a booklet sent to everybody's home, at least it'll be there. Our walking book for the Simsbury Land Trust has been very popular. People keep it as a reference. We're hoping people keep the invasive plant guide as a reference so they can see. If you don't know what you're looking for, you can flip through the book and you can start to see, maybe I have that in my yard. And if not, there are wonderful plant IDs apps on phones. You don't have to have your own botanist go with you to your yard. You can take these phones and identify these plants. But you first have to know that this is an issue. I love this. This is up. Unfortunately, we can't do this. This was up in Garden in the Woods from the Native Plant Trust. Would that worked, but how are we going to get rid of them? Well, some things you can just pull. You can pull when the soil's soft, especially in the spring. It's easy. You need to get all the roots. It's always good to wear gloves because these plants do produce chemicals that can sometimes irritate your skin, and then you have to dispose of the pulled material in a proper way. If you've got bigger things that can't be pulled out by hand, there are wonderful heavy tools that you can go and rip these things out of the ground. They're not inexpensive, but if you've got a lot to do, it will save your back and arms. If you have things like mugwort, plastic is your friend. Clear plastic, you can cover them up and allow the sun to heat up the soil. It's called solarization, and it will kill the plants, it will kill the roots, it will kill the seeds, it will heat up the soil. You might have to leave it on for several months. It's not going to be particularly attractive, but it's effective. For the vines that are growing up the tree, do not pull the vines out of the tree because the broken branches will fall down on you. So cut them up at chest height, cut them near the ground, and you'd have to keep cutting because once you cut them down the ground, they will resprout from their other roots. So I never thought I'd be advocating for the use of herbicides, but I have come to the conclusion that these are the only things that will work on these plants. I like to think of these as biological cancers on the landscape, and the herbicides are the chemotherapy. There are ways of doing it in a very limited fashion. These are the most expensive bottles, plastic bottles known to man, buckthorn blaster, and the Play Clean and Glow. You can put the herbicide in there with a little food dye, and then you can paint it off. As soon as you cut the woody stem, you can put that on, and you can use either a glyphosate or a triclopyr, or you can spray it on the trunk. And if you've got something bigger, but you only have to spray it on the outside rim of a woody plant. That's the only part that's alive. For some of the plants, it's very tricky, especially knotweed, the plant that will not die. But there is a group called Nix the Knotweed. It's a volunteer group that's trying to figure out how to kill these plants, which we have increasing numbers. And I recommend going on their website. You can cut these things 3 times a year, interplant them with other things, but you're never going to necessarily get rid of them, but you're going to be able to control them and keep them from respreading. And then it matters when you do it. There are certain plants that can be done in the spring, there are certain plants that can be done in the winter, there are certain plants, but generally, before flowering, you need to cut or pull them before they flower. Once they flower and once they set seeds, it's a bit late, but you can still get them out of the way. And it's better to do it before the seeds form. You can cut and pull while it's relocating at the end of the season where they're pulling the nutrients down into the roots for the winter. And I like to say never miss a good drought, because when we have a drought, the plants are already weakened, and if you go and do that final cut, that might just do them in. So the droughts have their purpose. And you have to be persistent, because there will be a seed bank, the birds will be bringing more seeds in, and you have to watch for the resprouting from the roots. So once you've cut them down, what do you do with all this stuff? Well, plastic bags are good if it's small and if, it's a limited amount, and then leave those plastic bags in the sun to cook. Leave them for several months. You don't want to put them in your compost bin because you will be putting all the seeds back into your compost. So this is a very effective way of doing it. If they haven't buried, if it's woody and they haven't have berries on them. You can put them into a brush pile. This is actually a habitat, good for habitat for a lot of smaller creatures, for birds and chipmunks and things like that. And if you have a bigger tree, you can cut down to through the living layer of the tree. You could apply herbicides there. This doesn't work very well with Norway maple. They just have a very strong will to live. But, don't do this near your house or your neighbor's house or anyone's car. But if you're out in the middle of the woods, you can do that. As I said, Simsbury is doing forest mulching. This is horribly expensive. We can only do it, 6 to 8 acres at a time. And after we did one forest mulching, we did get a complaint from someone who was hiking the trail and said we ruined the forest by cutting down all these invasive plants. But he didn't know they were invasive. They looked healthy. They looked like they were supposed to be there. But we cut them down, we sprayed them, and it is lovely to see other things coming up, healthy things. But I love it. You try to do this in your yard. Try doing it in our forest. It's hard. So I'll make a public announcement. We've had invasive plant working days to come, and it's partly to train people how to remove them, but also try to get these out of our yards. But we can't do it in Simsbury properties, on our town properties or in our forest preserves, if we don't do it in our own yards. We have to work together on this, because if we leave one area, they will just spread from there back into the areas where the plants have been removed. So this is something that I think needs to be approached not only on a town basis, but on a regional basis. So we have to do this. And then there's some other techniques for removing them. I'd say, use the food chain. The plants are kept in control by a whole host of things. This is what we learned in third grade about the food chain. I always love the fact that all of the animals draw our attention. The plants, they just have grass there. They only have one plant there, and it's just grasses. Well, there are many different kinds. And there are many different kinds of grasshoppers too, but we tend to focus on that part that's above. The most important part of the food chain are the plants. If we didn't have any of the plants, we wouldn't have any of the rest of them of the food chain. So we need the creatures that eat those plants, and that's where a lot of scientific research is going on. For the Japanese knotweed, they're trying to bring in what they call a monophagous, meaning an insect that only eats one thing. Scientists go to the region where this plant was from and find the insect that helps keep that plant in control in that area. So there are some beetles for garlic mustard control. Purple loosestrife control was one of the first ones, and they've been pretty successful. You don't see nearly as much purple loosestrife as we did several years ago. This would be hopeful, a mile a minute vine weevil, and you can see how small it is in that lower bit. There's by the penny. This could be our eggs or the larvae. And then some of these these plants were brought over because they're edible. So you can actually eat, after you've harvested all your garlic mustard, if you haven't sprayed them with anything, you can make a lovely garlic mustard pesto. You can weaken your Japanese knotweed by making it into a nice stir fry. And autumn olive, you eat them before the birds do. It's very high in lycopene, which is very good for men and their health. So you can use them. Or we can just turn the goats loose on them. The goats will eat a lot of them, but then you have to have the donkey to ward off the coyotes who are going to eat the goats, so it gets complicated. But they are effective. I love seeing a sign at Martha's Vineyard that said, scapegoat goatscaping. So that was good. But the whole reason for doing this is because we need to reestablish the food chain the way it's supposed to be. We need our native plants to support our native animals and wildlife and insects especially. And there's a wonderful book by Douglas Tallamay, Bringing Nature Home. He's an entomologist with the University of Delaware. And the lovely thing about being a professor is that you have grad students and undergraduates who can go out and collect data. And they analyze. He was looking at why should we plant native plants as opposed to the things we were putting in our yards. And he found that native plants provide the right nutrition at the right size at just the right time. And it's not a coincidence that a lot of those berries are just the size to fit down the throat of a songbird. We have a native dogwood that's true for. We have the top one. The berries fit beautifully down the throat. But a lot of times we plant, and I know I planted non-native dogwoods, and they had these big, mushy berries. And they're not designed to fit down the throat of the birds. And that's because they were designed for another animal to distribute their berries. They were designed for the monkeys in Asia to eat those berries and spread them in their droppings. We don't have monkeys, so we don't need this tree. And you can often see under that tree that there's a big mess of berries. Anytime you see a big mess of berries under something, that means it's not part of the food chain, it's not being eaten, it's not doing what that plant was designed to do, just distribute its seeds and feed the wildlife. And the nice thing about a lot of our berries is they come out at just the right time for a particular species or for birds. Here you can see the yellow rump warbler eating bayberries. They are very high in lipids and nutrients that will help sustain those yellow rump warblers when they're on their long migration in the fall. So it's critical to their life cycle. It's critical to the life cycle of the plant that these birds eat them and carry them when they're doing their migration, and it's critical to the migration of the birds to have nutritious food on that migration. But what Douglas Talmay found that's really interesting is that it's the caterpillars. The caterpillars are a way of taking a leaf and turning it into little packages of protein. And the native plants, the native woody plants that we have, produce so many more caterpillars than our non-native, 35 times more caterpillar biomass on our native plants. And you don't see them because they do. That's what those beady little eyes are for. So here we have, they're going out to find caterpillars because they are the perfect food for baby birds. Let's see if I can get them. So the question is, here is the mother bird who's come to feed her chicks. This is a site that I don't think I can point on, this is on, no, yes. No, there. That is a site no mother bird wants to see. So she's come back with one caterpillar. Who is she going to give it to? She's not going to divide that caterpillar into 7 little pieces. Who's going to get it? Well, actually, it's going to be the one with the biggest mouth. So him. And then once he gets that caterpillar, he's going to go to sleep. Dad's going to come by a few minutes later, and it's going to put it in the next biggest mouth. Maybe it's that one. And they're going to work their way down every few minutes until they get to this small one. And hopefully he will get a caterpillar before that one wakes up. Because if that one wakes up, he's going to get the caterpillar. And the little one, if there aren't enough caterpillars going around, Mom and Dad are realistic and say there are not enough caterpillars going around, can't raise all of them, and he might get pushed out of the nest. So you need caterpillars to raise. The question is, how many does it take to raise how many caterpillars? They're in the nest for about 3 weeks. They grow rather quickly. How many caterpillars does it take to raise one nest of chickadees? For those of you who don't know, haven't read Douglas Talmay already. All right. It's actually higher than this, between 6,000 and 10,000. That's to raise one nest of baby birds. Then we need an astounding number of caterpillars. And most of our songbirds feed their chicks insects. And they need hundreds of chicks. They start from the time the sun comes up in the morning, and they time the hatch of their eggs to just when the leaves come out so that there are caterpillars there to feed their young. And they start from the time the sun comes up until the time the sun goes down. They're feeding those caterpillars. They're back and forth, back and forth, and back and forth. And they have to be found within 50 yards of the nest. So the birds in the spring are checking out your yard to see whether you have suitable plants in your yard. And if you don't have any birds' nests in your yard, there's a reason for it. There are no caterpillars in your yard. They're very good botanists. So, and the interesting thing is most of our insects are specialists. They eat only a few of our native plants. And here's the contrast. This is what Douglas Talmay and his group found. Oaks support an incredible amount by insect species. It's mostly the Lepidoptera, the caterpillars and moths, the moths and the butterfly caterpillars. So you can see a lot of different species of caterpillars are supported by these native plants, also other insects. But then look at what we plant. There's hardly anything. They just do not support the caterpillars that we need. So if we don't have the caterpillars to support the baby birds, we don't get the adult birds. We don't get the adult birds. We don't have birds to do the insect control on our other plants. So it's one of these vicious cycles. And I saw this a about a year or so ago, is the North American birds are shrinking likely as a result of warming climate. Everything's blamed on warming climate, but I don't think this is one of them. If those birds don't have enough to eat when they're young, they're not going to grow up to be big strapping birds. And if we don't feed our children, they're going to turn kind of short. And so I'm not sure that the birds in New Jersey are a different size than Connecticut. So no, it's what we're planting in our yards that's making this difference. And this is something that's showing up around the country, around the world. You can see the drop in the insect populations, and this is being found around the world. These are the insects in Germany. You can see in 78% drop in 24 years. Well, what the heck is going on there? So there's something about either the herbicide use that we're using, the plants we're using, the insecticides. There are a whole lot of things to go. But I do remember driving around in the country, taking car trips as a youth, and there were insects all over the windshield. I don't think windshields are designed any better now than they were to prevent insect collision. It's because the insect populations are just not there. Without the insects converting the leaves into protein packages, we're just not going to have the insect diversity we need. So what Douglas Talame and his group found is that wherever we have native vegetation, we have more bird species and more birds in total. We need them to do all the ecological services they provide. And where we have non-native vegetation, we have fewer birds and fewer insects. So not only do we have to remove the invasive species, we need to put in the native plants. And that's a talk for another day. Whoops, go back one. And fortunately, there's more and more information what to plant once you take out those non-native plants. These will bring life to your garden and health to your garden. And it's something that we all need to do, and it's something we all need to take to be. We need to recognize these plants. We need to take action on these plants. It seems like a daunting project, but there are a lot of us, and they don't grow as quickly as we do. We're faster than them. We can move, they can't. We know where they're hiding. We need to do this. And if we don't do anything, it's just not going to get better. We can give up, but it's just not going to be a healthy environment. So that's what I wanted to talk about today. I hope this has been helpful. And I hope I haven't ruined all your walks as you go walking in our lovely preserves. So, all right. So let's move on to the rest of the presentation. I'll switch back over to here. Do we have any questions?
I just have a question about some of the stuff you mentioned. Are nurseries still selling this stuff?
It's a double-sided thing. If people keep asking for Bernie bush, they will sell it. But
Butterfly bushes,
Oh.
or everybody needs a butterfly.
no, it only feeds, but butterfly bush, we plant butterfly bush because it attracts butterflies. It doesn't attract any caterpillars.
Okay.
But
I think
if
we lost the whole, nobody mentioned.
we've lost the thread, we forgot all about that thing we learned in second grade.
Butterfly.
Yeah, we just want to see the butterflies, we just want to see the birds. We forget about the juvenile stage of these things, so we have to go back and relearn that. But yeah, they'll sell it as long as we keep asking for them. But I like to think of that, peer pressure is a very strong force. I mean, people are not smoking the way they used to. It became out of fashion. So I'm thinking that we're not planting yews around our house the way that we were in the 1950s and 60s. There's certain things that go in and out of style with gardens, and that's the same thing. I think burning bush and Japanese barberry and a lot of those other plants should become out of fashion. And if you have them in your yard,
I just think the butterfly thing, no matter where you go, it attracts butterflies.
It's
Nobody
not-
talks about anything but
No.
you want butterflies.
You're absolutely
but
right.
you don't realize.
no. So we all need to be re-educated about life cycles of
I mean,
these creatures.
There's
And-
like a big gap there.
and-
I just didn't know it myself.
And Douglas Talame has umpteen dozen videos online. He's, if you go on YouTube and just type in Douglas Talame, he's an excellent speaker, and very entertaining. And he has a movement that if everyone could shrink their lawns, plant native plants, we would have we'd have more area in native plants than we would in any of our 48 national parks in the lower. The national parks in the lower 48 states, and they'd be contiguous. So there are a lot of different arguments that he makes, but he's very entertaining. Just take 1 hour and listen to him. He's great. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
It comes from your referring to lots of plants that were vines with long roots. You have to take forever to find those roots. How susceptible are those plants to being sprayed with herbicides? If you cut a bunch, if you leave some of the leaves and you spray, can they do the thing they say they do, which is to kill it in the roots?
There are some herbicides that are more successful than others for various plants. Knotweed is tricky. And, you know, it's a balance between using really horribly toxic things and killing this thing off. The Canton, they have something called the pollen pathway, and I see Holly's here, and Holly is in the Collins pollen pathway, and they've been very successful in controlling, to a degree, what was a huge stand of Japanese knotweed. I mean, it still comes up, but you tackle it, you're on top of it, right? Holly, would you say?
It's moving.
Yes, it's a never, and you know, it's an ongoing thing. Yeah.
Like crabgrass.
Yeah. So, you know, and you know, there's a lot of research. You know, it'd be lovely if we could finally get an insect or something that would eat it. And I mean, the insects are so much better at it than we are.
Curious, so what is, my perception is that the town is not doing anything. And one of my concerns is that there's a lot of invasives growing on town property. So the parks, had a lot of invasives on them, along the roads. You see Japanese knotweed, Simsbury's covered. Once you see it, you can't forget it. And it's all along the roads, and it doesn't seem like there's a lot of
Well, I know that
going on.
Department of Public Works is spraying it. There's concern about mowing it, because if you mow it and you get a slight, you know, small piece of it in the mower, and then you move on to another area and it gets into the soil again, it will start to spread. So I know they're not mowing it, they're doing the spraying. But the town, you know, it's gonna cost a lot. We need volunteers. We need to set up a program where people will handle certain sections, you know, like clean up this trail for a mile or whatever. We need the scout groups, we need the civic groups, we need every group, we need all hands on deck. I like to say that if everyone, when they walked, would pull out at least some of the easy ones, that would help. You know, every time you go on a walk, pull out, you know, task yourself with pulling out, I know my husband hates it when I do it, 20 plants per walk. You know, think about all the people that use the trail, it would help. But it's something that we have to start with education, and then make it a priority. We need voices to say it's an issue.
Well, isn't that the role of this commission?
Yes, that's why we're doing this program.
But how is the town, because I would like to see the town employees, people who are
Well, we
doing
need-
groundkeeping, all
We need
go into
training.
this
We need
and
training for the
training
town.
Or a mandatory class that they all need to take
Yeah,
so they can
yeah,
identify it.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that it needs to be a priority to remove it on town property.
I think so.
And they should have a database of the locations where this is.
And we have
And
this.
they should have a way for the public to call in and report.
Yeah, we
You
do
know,
have
I
the information for some of these plants on our website for the Conservation Commission. I think open space too. But again, if you're not thinking about these plants, you're not going to go to this. And that's why, and I think we need to work with our other groups like the Farming the River Watershed and the Wild and Scenic Study Group. I know they fund some of the invasive plant removal programs that we've done. And getting this booklet out in everyone's hand at least might start the ball rolling. Because once you see them in your yard, you realize what they are, then it's not good. So hopefully other people will watch this. I know everyone, this is what they turn into on an evening. So it's a start. So we'll be having more of these programs.
The last thing I'm thinking of, because I have the people next door to me, somebody had a garden that went fallow. I have mugwort that it's killer stuff. I didn't realize, I mean, I knew bittersweet, I had to put the black bag and it's
Yes.
sitting out there.
Yeah.
But the rest of it I threw in the woods.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah,
didn't know, but
no.
it's like, I live in a condo, it's like, where the heck am I supposed to put
I know.
piles, or even if I took a walk, and what do I do with them? I pulled up my 20 plants, what do I do
So
now?
if it's a shrub like or bittersweet and you pull it out, hang the roots on a shrub, so the roots are up in the air to dry out. Don't put it in contact with the ground. If it's knotweed before, I mean, not knotweed, mugwort, before it starts to flower, put it in the parking lot where it can be cooked, somewhere, just somewhere where it's not gonna grow.
No, I mean,
But yeah, but-
there's no place, if you
No.
don't have,
No, I know.
where do we put
Condos,
this stuff?
but that's the
Like a
whole,
cat and a
the
hat?
condo association needs to have a meeting.
Does the landfill have a place where you could bring stuff? I mean, that would be the obvious place for
Yeah.
me to bring it,
But
and
there's
they
so
would
much.
put it.
Yeah, George, I don't know that we have a landfill that's suitable
A
for,
designated area that you can put bad stuff.
I don't think we advertise for that.
No.
for sure.
no. Well, we have talked in the open space about having an invasive plant removal day or a couple of days, a year. So, just, we need more ideas, we need more people involved. We need to start a group.
Marjorie, is it safe to say that some of the work that you're doing on the Simsbury Land Trust, to see how that works and use that as part of a guide as you
Yeah.
think about expanding those
Yeah.
programs to
Yeah.
other parts of the town?
Yeah, we're just learning how to do it ourselves, and we're
Right.
hoping that then translates into being able to show that this is possible. I mean, it's gonna be a lot of work, especially since a lot of these things have spread quite nicely. And there are always new ones, that's the horrible thing about it. So, think very carefully about when you buy a new plant, where it's from. One of the things is a lot of the land that we had used to be farmland, so a lot of our native plants were eliminated from the landscape. By planting native plants in our own land, our own properties, if they escape into the woods,
It'll spread.
you're guilt-free. And I know this has happened at the Roaring Brook Nature Center. We started a native plant garden in 2000, and over the years, I've been surprised to see how many of the plants from our native plant garden got into the woods, which was very exciting to see, things that I hadn't seen in the woods before. So it's nice when those things spread.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Yeah.
Just one other comment, one of the things observationally is that any property in Connecticut that's not managed, not mowed or gardened or weeded, will end up with invasives.
Yeah.
So I was driving on some of that property that the town purchased a couple of years ago on Firetown and Barn Door, and it's full of invasive plants.
I know, that triangle, there's a lot of discussions at the open space. We did have people in to look at it from DEEP. We had someone from NOFA, which is the New England Organic Farming Association. Both the representatives from those groups said that, we have things like Japanese oriental bittersweet, we have reed canary grass, which I didn't talk about, we have mugwort, we have a lot of the really nasty ones to control, and they will require mowing and chemical treatment, which is a big budget item, but it also requires that we do an educational thing for the surrounding landowners to say, this is required in order to reestablish. I know Hartford Audubon is very excited about that property because it's a big grass area for the grassland birds. We don't have many of those anymore. They would love to see something, it needs to be reestablished because right now it will become a source for those plants to spread back into our yards, even if we remove them from our yards. So we have to look at this thing holistically and sort of establish priorities and targets and go at it. Thank you. Thank you, Michelle.
Well,
All right.
somebody's looking at it.
Well, we're looking at it moving slowly though. Yeah, so,
Thank you.
all right. Any other? Thank you all. New applications, we do not have any.
No, we have no new applications. I just have one designated agent approval to report on, and that is it. Let me just bring it up. It is at 11 Kings Road. Work is approximately 33 feet from the water course. The owner would like to level out his yard. There's depressions there from previous trees. So they're bringing in approximately 5 yards of topsoil to fill in these depressions. And then grass will be reseeded. And then he has silt fencing as proposed on the map to protect the water course. And that is it.
Any other questions about that? All right, thank you, Brittany. So no public hearings, applications, old commission business?
None for me.
All right, so I think that's it for the evening. So do we have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?